In the deepest hours of night, when even the stars seemed to hold their breath, a meeting took place that would echo through the ages of Middle-earth. Few knew it happened, fewer still guessed its true purpose. Yet, when Gandalf the Grey and Galadriel, Lady of Light, met in the heart of Lothlorien, the very fate of the world shifted in silence. Picture, if you will, the golden wood at twilight's edge. Silver light cascades through leaves that have known no winter, no decay. The Malorn trees stretch toward heaven like pillars in some ancient cathedral, their bark gleaming with an inner radiance that speaks of older days, when the world was young and the Valar walked openly among the children of Ilúvatar. Here, beneath branches that remembered the light of the two trees, Galadriel waited. She stood beside the mirror of her own making, its waters dark and still, reflecting not the present moment, but glimpses of what was, what is, and what yet may come to pass. Her golden hair caught the starlight, each strand seeming to hold within it the memory of Laurelin's glory, and in her eyes, those eyes that had looked upon the undying lands, there burned a knowledge both terrible and beautiful. Through the whispering paths of Lorien, a figure approached. Gandalf the Grey, his weathered staff tapping softly against the springy turf, his wide-brimmed hat casting shadows across features worn by countless years of wandering. He moved with the quiet purpose of one who carried secrets too heavy for ordinary minds to bear. Behind him, the very air seemed to shimmer with barely contained power, though he walked in the guise of a simple traveler. What brought these two together in such secrecy? What words passed between the Maiar who had descended from Valinor in humility and the Noldoran princess who had chosen exile over submission? Their conversation would carry seeds of future battles, the formation of the White Council, the discovery of the ring, the long shadow cast by Dol Guldur's fortress of fear. But here, in this moment suspended between starlight and shadow, they spoke of things that would never be written openly in the Red Book of Westmarch. Their meeting would remain a whisper in the wind, a secret preserved in the memory of trees and the songs of nightingales. The question that haunts us still is this: what truths did they share? And why was their counsel hidden from the records of history? To understand the weight of this clandestine encounter, we must first trace the golden threads that bound these two beings across the vast tapestries of time. Theirs was not a friendship born of chance meetings or shared adventures, but a recognition that reached back to the very foundations of the world. Galadriel, whose name in the tongue of her people meant Lady of Light, carried within her veins the fire of the Noldor. Born in the blessed realm of Valinor during the years of the trees, she had walked in gardens where every flower sang with living music, had breathed air sweet with the mingled light of Telperion and Lorelin. Yet unlike many of her kin, her heart had always turned toward the unknown lands beyond the Eastern Sea. When Feanor wrought his terrible oath and the Noldor took ship for Middle-earth, Galadriel did not follow the kinslayer's banner. Instead, she chose her own path of exile, crossing the grinding ice of the Helcaraxi with the host of Fingolfin. Her feet had touched the shores of Middle-earth, not as a conqueror seeking Silmarils, but as one who had glimpsed the wide world in her mind and found it fair. She had refused the pardon of the Valar, choosing instead to remain in the mortal lands as guardian and guide. For thousands of years, she had dwelt in Middle-earth, watching kingdoms rise and fall like waves upon a distant shore. She had seen the glory of Gil-galad's realm, the might of Númenor at its height, and the slow darkening that followed Sauron's first defeat. Through all these ages, she had grown in wisdom and power, until her very presence was like a shield against the darkness. Her realm of Lothlorien, a sanctuary where evil things dared not tread. And then there was Gandalf, though that was not the name by which he had been known in Valinor. In the Undying Lands, he had been called Olorin, and he had dwelt in the gardens of Lorien the Vala, where he learned the music of growing things and the deep speech of the earth. Unlike Galadriel, who had come to Middle-earth in her own glory, Olorin had been sent. When the shadow of Sauron began to grow long across the eastern lands, the Vala had chosen 5 from among the Maiar to take flesh and walk as wizards among the children of Ilúvatar. But where his fellow Istari had accepted power and position, Gandalf had embraced humility. He wandered the roads as a pilgrim, a friend to hobbits and kings alike, carrying his wisdom lightly like a traveler's pack. Yet beneath his grey robes burned the flame imperishable, and those with eyes to see recognized in him one of the mighty who had helped sing the world into being. Both Galadriel and Gandalf bore another secret, one that bound them in understanding deeper than words. Each carried one of the 3 rings of the elves. She bore Nenya, the ring of water, while hidden beneath his rough garments. Gandalf wore Narya, the ring of fire. These were not tools of dominion like the ring that Sauron had forged in secret, but instruments of preservation and protection wrought by Celebrimbor in defiance of the Dark Lord's will. When Tolkien wrote of these 2 in his letters and marginalia, he hinted at a bond that transcended the ordinary alliances of the wise. Here were 2 exiles from paradise, one who had refused to return, one who had been sent away with a mission, both bearing the weight of powers that could preserve or destroy. Their memories stretched back to the music of creation itself, to the very moment when Ilúvatar spoke the world into being with the harmony of the Ainulindale. In Galadriel's mirror, past and future bent like light through crystal. In Gandalf's eyes burned the flame that had kindled the first sunrise. When such beings met in council, their words carried the weight of ages, and their silences spoke volumes that lesser minds could never fathom. This was no mere political alliance, but a recognition between kindred spirits who bore the responsibility of shepherding Middle-earth through its darkest hour. As the Third Age deepened like gathering dusk, a shadow began to spread from the southern reaches of Mirkwood. What had once been a forest bright with singing birds and dancing sunlight grew dark and tangled, its very name changing from Greenwood the Great to Mirkwood the Fell. Spiders of monstrous size spun their webs between ancient trees, and paths that had been walked by elves for thousands of years became choked with thorns and haunted by whispers of malice. At the heart of this corruption stood a fortress of black stone, Dol Guldur, the Hill of Sorcery. From its towers, built in mockery of the fair architecture of the Eldar, there emanated a presence that made the very stones weep and the trees turn their faces away. The local people spoke in hushed tones of the necromancer, a sorcerer who could summon spirits from their rest and bend the wills of the living to his dark purposes, before any hobbit would find a golden ring in a tunnel beneath the misty mountains. For centuries, the wise had watched this growing shadow with increasing concern. Elrond of Rivendell noted the decline in the songs of birds that migrated over Mirkwood. Thranduil's people withdrew deeper into their woodland realm, their borders patrolled by warriors whose faces grew grimmer with each passing year. Even in far Lothlorien, Galadriel felt the disturbance like a discordant note in the music of the earth. But it was Gandalf who dared to seek the truth. Driven by a growing unease that went beyond mere suspicion, he approached the fortress in secret, his grey robes concealing him among the shadows of the twisted trees. What he found there would haunt him for centuries to come. The necromancer was no mere mortal sorcerer dabbling in dark arts, but something far more terrible, a presence that emanated malice like heat from a forge, a will that sought to dominate all living things. In the dungeons beneath Dol Guldur, Gandalf discovered evidence that confirmed his darkest fears. Ancient weapons of power lay scattered like toys, their light dim and their edges turned to rust. Prisoners from a dozen lands languished in cells of black iron, their minds broken by torments beyond description. And everywhere, scratched into stone and carved into wood, was a symbol that made the wizard's blood run cold. The eye, the mark of Sauron, the deceiver. The necromancer was no petty conjurer, but the Dark Lord himself, returned to physical form and building his strength in secret, while the free peoples of Middle-earth believed him defeated forever. The implications crashed over Gandalf like a tide of dark water. If Sauron lived, if he was gathering power in the very heart of Middle-earth, then everything they had fought for in the last alliance hung in the balance once again. Gandalf's escape from Dol Guldur was harrowing, pursued by Nazgul on fell beasts and orc riders whose mounts left tracks of shadow on the forest floor. He fled westward through paths known only to the elves. His very survival seemed to depend on forces beyond mere luck, as if the earth itself conspired to hide him from his pursuers, as if the remaining light in Mirkwood gathered around him like a protective cloak. But escape was only the beginning. The knowledge he carried was too dangerous to bear alone, too vital to trust to ordinary messengers. The White Council would need to know, but Saruman had grown strange and secretive in recent years, more concerned with his own researches than with the growing shadow in the east. Radagast was too innocent, too caught up in his love of growing things to comprehend the full scope of the threat. Elrond was wise, but bound by his role as keeper of Rivendell. It was then that Gandalf's thoughts turned to Galadriel. She alone among the White Council possessed both the wisdom to understand what he had discovered and the power to act upon it. More than that, she had opposed Sauron since the Elder Days, had seen his treachery firsthand when he walked in fair form among the Eldar. If anyone could help him navigate the treacherous path ahead, it would be the Lady of Light. The journey to Lothlorien took on the quality of a pilgrimage. With each league westward, Gandalf felt the weight of his discovery settling upon his shoulders like a mantle of lead. The fate of Middle-earth might hang upon the counsel he sought, upon the alliance he hoped to forge in the golden halls of Galadriel's realm. Behind him, Dol Guldur brooded like a cancer in the heart of the world, and ahead lay decisions that would echo through the turning of the ages. If Sauron was indeed the necromancer, then the world stood on the edge of war, while Gandalf bore his terrible knowledge westward through the darkening lands. Galadriel stood beside her mirror, watching the ripples of possibility spread across its surface like stones cast into still water. The sight that had been her gift and her burden since the days of her youth in Valinor showed her fragments of what was to come, glimpses of fire and shadow, of small figures bearing great burdens, of towers falling and trees walking. But foresight, she had learned through long centuries, was both blessing and curse. To see the future was not to control it, and the paths that led through darkness often demanded choices that no amount of wisdom could make easy. She had watched the rise and fall of kingdoms, had seen friends pass into memory and enemies rise from the ashes of defeat. Yet through all these turnings of the wheel, she had never ceased to guard the light that remained in Middle-earth. Galadriel's opposition to the growing darkness was not born of recent fear, but of ancient memory. She had been there in Ost-in-Edhil when Sauron came disguised as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, offering knowledge and friendship to the elven smiths. Where others saw a fair messenger bearing wonders from distant lands, she had perceived the shadow that clung to him like a second skin. Her warnings had gone unheeded then, dismissed as the suspicions of one too proud to accept counsel. When Celebrimbor and his craftsmen forged the rings of power under Sauron's guidance, Galadriel had withdrawn from their counsels. She sensed the trap being laid, though she could not yet see its full scope. only when the 3 rings were made in secret, Vilya, Narya, and Nenya, wrought without Sauron's touch, did she consent to bear one of the great rings, accepting Nenya as both weapon and burden. The ring of water her, to become part of her over the long years, its power flowing through her like a hidden river. With it, she could preserve what was fair, could hold back the decay that crept through the world like age through mortal flesh. Lothlorien itself was her masterwork, a realm where autumn never came, where the golden leaves fell and renewed themselves in endless cycle, where time moved differently than in the outer world. But Nenya's power came with a price. The more she used it to preserve and protect, the more she became bound to Middle-earth itself. The ring was both anchor and chain, keeping her from the grey havens and the ships that sailed into the west. She had chosen to remain as guardian and guide, but in doing so, she had accepted an exile that would last until the very foundations of her defences crumbled. Her distrust of Saruman had grown slowly, like frost forming on a window pane. The White Wizard commanded the respect of the White Council by virtue of his order and his knowledge, but Galadriel's sight showed her glimpses of a mind turning inward, consumed by pride and the desire for mastery. Where Gandalf walked among the peoples of Middle-earth as friend and counselor, Saruman had withdrawn to his tower, surrounding himself with machinery and mirrors, seeking to penetrate the secrets of the enemy through study rather than understanding. When the White Council had been formed, Galadriel had quietly suggested that Gandalf should lead them. His wisdom was deeper than Saruman's learning, his heart uncorrupted by the desire for dominion. But the other members had deferred to the White Wizard's seniority, and Gandalf himself had declined the honor with characteristic humility. Yet Galadriel watched and waited, and prepared for the day when true leadership would be needed. Her invitation to Gandalf to enter Lothlorien freely had been more than courtesy. She alone among the great powers of Middle-earth had recognized the flame that burned within the Grey Pilgrim, had seen past his humble exterior to the Maya spirit that dwelt within. When other realms were closed to the Istari by suspicion or protocol, the Golden Wood remained open to Gandalf, a haven where he could speak freely and find counsel when the burden of his mission grew too heavy to bear alone. In her mirror, Galadriel had seen glimpses of the meetings yet to come, fragments of a White Council debate where voices would be raised in argument, where Saruman's will would clash against the growing urgency of the situation. She had seen flashes of a greater conflict, where the fate of all the free peoples would hang upon decisions made in haste and fear. And through it all, she had seen Gandalf at the center of the storm, bearing responsibilities that would test even his ancient wisdom. The question that haunted her silver dreams was whether Gandalf fully understood his role in the unfolding drama. Did he realize that the other Istari were already failing in their missions? Saruman grew proud and secretive. Radagast became lost in his love of wild things, and the Blue Wizards had vanished into the east without word or sign. If the Valar's plan for Middle-earth was to succeed, it would fall to Gandalf to carry the weight alone. As she gazed into the mirror's depths, watching the play of starlight on its surface, Galadriel began to suspect that she was already preparing Gandalf to be the true leader of whatever resistance would rise against the returning darkness, not through open challenge to Saruman's authority. That would only breed division when unity was needed, but through quiet counsel and hidden support, through the kind of patient guidance that shapes events from the shadows. He pieces were moving on a board vast as Middle-earth itself, and the game that was beginning would determine whether the light of the Elder Days would endure or fade forever into memory. The White Council, when it finally came into being, was born from necessity and shaped by compromise. In the great halls of Rivendell, where the banners of Gil-galad still hung in memory of the last alliance, 5 of the wise gathered to address the growing shadow in the east. Yet, from its very inception, the council was divided by personalities as much as united by purpose. Saruman the White arrived with all the pageantry befitting his station. His robes gleamed like fresh snow in sunlight, his staff crowned with crystal that caught and scattered the light of Elrond's lamps. He spoke with the authority of one who had delved deepest into the lore of rings and ancient powers, whose library in Isengard contained scrolls and tomes gathered from the ruins of Númenor itself. When he took his place at the head of the council's table, it seemed as natural as sunrise. Beside him sat Elrond, bearing the weight of 3 ages upon his shoulders. The Lord of Rivendell had stood with Gil-galad on the slopes of Mount Doom, had seen Isildur's fateful choice at the Sammath Naur. His wisdom was tempered by memory of both victory and loss, his counsel sought by kings and common folk alike. Yet in the council's debates, he often found himself caught between Saruman's confident assertions and Gandalf's growing urgency. Radagast the Brown came reluctantly, his robes stained with earth and moss, his thoughts still half-tangled in the concerns of his woodland realm. The birds brought him news from across Middle-earth, and the beasts of field and forest answered his call. But the subtle machinations of dark powers seemed to slide past his awareness like water off a duck's wing. He was goodness embodied, but perhaps too innocent for the harsh necessities that lay ahead. Yet even as these thoughts raced through Gandalf's mind, there was another consideration that would prove even more crucial to what followed. The question that had haunted the Istari since their first arrival in Middle-earth. What were the limits of their restrictions? When did guidance become interference? When did service require the revelation of true power? And most importantly, what price would the Valar exact for breaking the bounds they had set? In the darkness of Moria, with the shadow and flame of Durin's Bane approaching, and his companions depending on his protection, Gandalf faced a choice that would define not only his own fate, but the fate of the entire mission of the Istari. To defeat a Balrog, he would need to step beyond the very boundaries that had been placed upon him. He would need to reveal the power he had hidden, to become more than Gandalf the Grey had ever been allowed to be. To face this enemy of the Elder Days, Gandalf would have to risk everything: his mission, his form, perhaps even his very existence in Middle-earth. The fear he felt was not just the fear of physical destruction, but the fear of a choice that could unmake everything he had worked to build over 2 millennia of patient service. But perhaps, in the deepest places of his immortal heart, Gandalf also recognized something else: the possibility that this confrontation was not mere chance, but part of a deeper design. Perhaps the Valar had known that such a choice would one day be required. Perhaps his fear was not a sign of failure, but the necessary prelude to transformation. The analysis of relative power between Gandalf and the Balrog had occupied Tolkien scholars for decades, and the master himself left us tantalizing glimpses of the truth in his letters and notes. Both beings were Maya, true, but their manifestations in Middle-earth were vastly different. The Balrog was a crave, Eacher unleashed, wielding power that had been accumulated and focused through millennia of unbridled existence. Gandalf was deliberately constrained, his true nature hidden beneath layers of limitation and mortal guise. Yet power, as Tolkien often demonstrated, was not merely a matter of raw strength. In his letter 156, the professor described Gandalf as the wisest of the Maya, suggesting that his authority came not from might alone, but from deep understanding of the music of creation and his place within it. The Balrog, for all its terrible strength, was a creature of discord, powerful, yes, but also ultimately destructive to the very fabric of reality it sought to dominate. The confrontation between them was therefore not simply a battle between 2 supernatural beings, but a collision between 2 fundamental approaches to power itself. The Balrog, represented power as domination, power as the imposition of will through force and terror. Gandalf represented power as service, power as the channeling of divine will toward harmony and healing. In their battle, these two philosophies would be tested against each other, with the fate of Middle-earth hanging in the balance. But there was another factor that complicated any simple analysis of their relative might, the question of Gandalf's restrictions. The Valar had sent the Istari to Middle-earth with explicit limitations on their power. They were not to reveal their true nature, not to dominate the peoples they came to aid, not to match might with might against the Dark Lord. These restrictions were not merely tactical suggestions, they were fundamental to the entire mission of the Istari. The wisdom behind these limitations was profound. The Valar had learned, through the long history of their intervention in Middle-earth, that the direct application of divine power often caused more harm than good. The secret meeting she would arrange with Gandalf was not born from sudden impulse but from careful calculation. Away from Saruman's watchful eyes and Elrond's diplomatic caution, she could speak freely of her fears and suspicions. More than that, she could begin the delicate work of preparing Gandalf for the leadership role that destiny seemed to be thrusting upon him. In the shadows of that great game, where the fate of Middle-earth hung in the balance, Galadriel began to plant the seeds of what would become Saruman's downfall and Gandalf's ultimate triumph. In all the debates of the White Council, in all the careful words and diplomatic silences, there remained one secret that bound Gandalf and Galadriel in understanding deeper than alliance. Each bore upon their hand one of the 3 rings of the elves, wrought in defiance of Sauron's treachery, hidden from his knowledge and preserved against the darkness that sought to claim all things. Galadriel wore Nenya openly in the sanctuary of Lothlorien, where her power was known and her authority unquestioned. The ring of water caught the light of the Malorn trees and scattered it like diamonds, its adamant set in a band of mithril that seemed to hold the very essence of starlight. Through Nenya, she had preserved her realm against the decay of time, had kept the golden wood as a living memory of the elder days when the world was fair and unshadowed. But the ring was more than a tool of preservation. It was a window into the deep currents that flowed beneath the surface of events, a means of perceiving the connections that bound all living things in webs of silver and gold. When Galadriel looked upon the world through Nenya's influence, she saw not just what was, but what could be, the potential that lay sleeping in every moment, waiting for the right word or deed to call it forth. Gandalf's burden was perhaps heavier, or he bore Narya in secret, hidden beneath his grey robes where none might guess at its presence. Círdan the shipwright had entrusted him with the Ring of Fire upon his arrival at the Grey Havens, recognizing in the humble wizard a flame that could kindle hope in the darkest hours. Unlike Vilya and Nenya, which preserved and revealed, Narya was a ring of inspiration and resistance, meant to strengthen hearts and rekindle courage when all seemed lost. The red ring pulsed with a warmth that never left Gandalf's finger, a gentle heat that reminded him of the flame imperishable that burned at the heart of all creation. Through its power, he could touch the spirits of those around him, could fan the spark of heroism that dwelt even in the humblest heart. It was Narya that had helped him kindle the courage of the Dunedain, that had strengthened Bilbo's resolve in the goblin tunnels, that would one day inspire a simple gardener to carry his master up the slopes of Mount Doom. When these 2 ring-bearers came together in the sanctuary of Lothlorien, their powers resonated like notes in harmony. The flame of Narya called to the waters of Nenya, and in their meeting, something new was born, a union of preservation and inspiration, of memory and hope. In that moment, both Gandalf and Galadriel understood that they were not merely allies in a political struggle, but partners in something far greater. The recognition passed between them without words, a knowledge that flowed through the connection their rings created. Each saw in the other not just a bearer of one of the three, but a kindred spirit who understood the weight of such responsibility. They alone among the White Council knew what it meant to wield power that could preserve the good while never dominating it, to hold in their hands the means to shape the world while never claiming mastery over it. This shared understanding brought with it a terrible clarity about their situation. If Sauron ever reclaimed the One Ring, their power would be turned against them. The three had been made to be free, but they were not beyond the reach of the ruling ring's dominion. Should the Dark Lord's victory be complete, Narya and Nenya would become chains rather than tools of liberation, binding their bearers to serve the very evil they had opposed. The implications reached far beyond their personal fate. If the rings of power fell under Sauron's control, the last bastions of the free peoples would crumble from within. Rivendell would wither as Vilya's preservation failed. Lothlorien would fade as Nenya's protection was turned to corruption, and the flame of hope that Narya kindled in mortal hearts would be snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. Yet in their shared peril, Gandalf and Galadriel found unexpected strength. The rings that made them vulnerable also bound them together in purpose. They could not afford to fail, could not permit themselves the luxury of doubt or hesitation. The fate of all the free peoples rested, in part, upon their ability to use their rings wisely and well. More than that, their partnership offered possibilities that neither could achieve alone. Galadriel's sight could show Gandalf the paths that lay ahead, while his inspiration could give her the courage to walk roads that led through darkness. Her preservation could protect what he built, while his fire could kindle new growth in the gardens she tended. In the quiet communion of their ring-touched minds, they began to perceive the shape of the struggle that lay ahead. It would not be won by armies alone, nor by the wisdom of councils, but by the choices of individuals, some great, some small, who would stand against the darkness when their moment came. Their role would be to prepare the ground foe for such choices, to preserve the light that would guide heroes yet unborn, and to kindle the flames that would burn in the hearts of those who would decide the fate of the world. This was the true secret of their alliance, not merely two powerful beings choosing to work together, but two ring-bearers recognizing their shared destiny and the hope that their unity represented for all of Middle-earth. The night Gandalf arrived in Lothlorien for their secret council was touched with magic even by the standards of that enchanted realm. The Malorn trees seemed to lean inward as if to listen, their golden leaves whispering secrets in languages older than the Eldar. Starlight fell through the canopy like liquid silver, pooling in clearings where the very grass seemed to glow with inner light. Even the air itself felt different, charged with possibility, pregnant with the weight of momentous decisions. Galadriel waited for him in her most private sanctuary, a glade where no foot walked save hers, where the mirror of her making reflected not the present moment, but the deep currents of time itself. She had set aside the formal robes of her station, appearing instead in simple white that caught the starlight and held it like captured moonbeams. Her golden hair flowed unbound about her shoulders, and in her eyes burned the light of Erendil's star, distant and pure. When Gandalf emerged from the shadows between the trees, his grey staff in hand and his weather-beaten hat pushed back from his brow, she saw immediately the weight he carried. His shoulders, which had borne the burdens of Middle-earth for centuries without complaint, seemed bent beneath some new and terrible knowledge. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and in their grey depths burned a flame that spoke of both fear and determination. "Mithrandir," she said, using the name by which the elves knew him, "you come bearing shadows, though the night is fair." He approached the mirror's edge, his reflection wavering in its depths like a flame in wind. Lady Galadriel, what I have seen in Dol Guldur would darken even this blessed realm could its shadow reach so far. The necromancer is no mere sorcerer playing with death's mysteries. He is Sauron. The name fell from her lips like a stone into still water. I have seen it in the mirror, though I hoped my sight deceived me. For a moment, they stood in silence, the full weight of that revelation settling between them like a physical presence. Around them, the golden wood continued its eternal song, but even the trees seemed to bow their heads in sorrow. The Dark Lord had returned, and with him came the shadow of wars that would shake the very foundations of the world. The White Council must act, Gandalf said, his voice carrying the authority of decision already made. Each day we delay gives him strength to spread his corruption further. The free peoples must know what they face. But Galadriel's expression was troubled, her gaze turning inward as if consulting some inner sight. Saruman will not hear you. His pride has grown too great, his fear too deep. He believes he can master what was meant to be destroyed, can claim dominion over the very power we exist to resist. The words hung between them like an accusation, though both knew they spoke truth. In their separate dealings with the White Wizard, each had sensed the change in him, the way his eyes lingered on ancient texts that spoke of the ruling ring, the questions he asked about its whereabouts and properties. Knowledge had become obsession, and obsession had begun its slow transformation into the very corruption they fought against. Then we must find another way, Gandalf said, his voice quiet, but resolute. The council may be compromised, but the cause is not lost. There are others who will stand against the darkness, if they know it comes. Galadriel moved to the mirror's edge, her hands trailing in its surface until the starlight reflected there began to swirl and shift. Images formed in the depths, glimpses of possible futures, fragments of paths not yet taken. I see small figures carrying great burdens, she murmured. I see fire on mountain peaks and ships sailing from grey shores. I see a king returning to claim his throne, and trees walking in wrath against those who would burn the world. And do you see victory in these visions? Gandalf asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I see hope, she replied, and that may be enough. Hope, and the choices yet unmade by hearts that have not been tested. The great may fail, Mithrandir, but the small may achieve what councils and armies cannot. They spoke then of practical matters, of the need to watch and wait, to gather intelligence while avoiding Saruman's increasingly suspicious gaze. They discussed the growing corruption in Mirkwood, the stirrings of evil in the mountains, the reports that came from rangers and merchants about strange creatures seen on the borders of the wild. Each piece of information was a thread in a tapestry of threat that was only beginning to reveal its full pattern. But beneath these strategic concerns ran deeper currents. Both knew that their alliance represented more than a sharing of intelligence or resources. In a time when the formal structures of resistance were failing, when councils bred discord and hierarchies fostered corruption, their partnership offered something different. A bond based not on authority or obligation, but on shared purpose and mutual trust. The rings we bear, Galadriel said, as the night deepened around them, bind us together in this struggle, but they also make us targets. Should Sauron reclaim his one ring, then our power becomes his weapon, Gandalf finished. I know. Yet what choice do we have but to use what strength remains to us, to preserve what light we can against the darkness he would bring? In the mirror's depths, new images began to form. They saw flashes of a small creature finding a golden ring in mountain depths, glimpses of smoke rising from a distant mountain, shadows of black riders on roads that ran with fear. The future was rushing toward them like a tide, and they could no more stop it than they could hold back the sunrise. "Neither of us will see the end unchanged," Galadriel said finally. "The victory we prepare for may come at costs we cannot yet imagine." But in her voice was acceptance, and in Gandalf's answering nod was determination. They had chosen their path long ago, in the halls of Valinor and on the shores of Middle-earth. Now they would walk it to whatever end awaited, bearing their light against the darkness, preserving what could be saved and kindling hope for what was yet to come. The secret council in Lothlorien planted seeds that would grow into the greatest conflict Middle-earth had known since the last alliance of elves and men. Though neither Gandalf nor Galadriel could have foreseen the exact shape of the war to come, their quiet alliance began to influence events across the breadth of the continent, like ripples spreading from a stone cast into still water. In the months that followed their meeting, Gandalf's travels took on new purpose and urgency. Where once he had wandered the roads as a friend and counselor, offering aid to those who needed it, now he became a gatherer of intelligence and a sower of readiness. His visits to the Shire grew more frequent, and he began to pay particular attention to the Baggins family of Bag End, sensing in them qualities that might prove useful in dark times ahead. The Grey Wizard's French IP with Bilbo Baggins had always puzzled those who observed it from the outside. What could a Maya who had helped sing the world into being find of interest in a comfortable hobbit whose greatest adventure was a walk to the mill? But Gandalf saw deeper than surface appearances. In Bilbo's occasional restlessness, in his love of maps and stories of far places, in the spark of curiosity that flickered behind his respectable exterior, the wizard recognized the potential for something greater. Meanwhile, Galadriel used her influence more subtly, but no less effectively. Her realm of Lothlorien became a beacon of hope and information, a place where the wise could meet without fear of Saruman's spies or the shadow of Dol Guldur's malice. The Lady of Light walked in many dreams, appearing to those who needed guidance at their moment of greatest need. Her words, when they came, were often cryptic, but they carried within them the wisdom of ages and the hope of better days to come. The White Council continued to meet, but its debates grew more heated and less productive with each gathering. Saruman's opposition to any direct action against Dol Guldur became increasingly rigid, while his private researchers delved ever deeper into dangerous territory. He had agents scouring the libraries of Minas Tirith and the archives of the Eldar, seeking any reference to the One Ring and its properties. His questions, when he thought himself unobserved, revealed a mind obsessed with mastery and dominion. Elrond found himself caught between competing visions of how to address the growing threat. His wisdom urged caution, his experience counseled patience. But the reports flowing in from across Middle-earth painted an increasingly dire picture. Orc raids grew bolder, dark creatures multiplied in the wild places, and even the weather seemed to turn malevolent, with storms striking at the worst possible moments and winter lingering far beyond its natural season. Through it all, Gandalf and Galadriel maintained their hidden correspondence, sharing information and insights that they dared not voice in the formal councils. Their alliance became the true heart of the resistance to Sauron's growing power, a partnership that transcended the political maneuvering and personal ambitions that plagued the official leadership of the Free Peoples. The partnership bore fruit in unexpected ways. When reports reached them of increased activity in the Misty Mountains, it was Gandalf who investigated, following rumors of goblin armies gathering in the deep places of the earth. His discoveries led him to the ancient dwarf city of Khazad-dûm, where he learned of horrors that dwelt in the darkness beneath the world. Yet even this knowledge became part of their broader strategy, for understanding their enemy's full strength was essential to any hope of victory. Galadriel's mirror began to show her more frequent glimpses of the small figures she had seen carrying great burdens. The visions were fragmentary and often symbolic, but patterns began to emerge. She saw a creature of shadow grasping for something precious, saw fire spreading across water, saw a great eye turning its attention southward toward realms of stone and steel. Each vision was a piece of a vast puzzle, and slowly, the shape of coming events began to resolve. The breakthrough came when both received confirmation of what they had long suspected. Sauron had indeed returned to Dol Guldur, and his power was growing with each passing day. The fortress had become a nexus of evil that poisoned the very earth around it, a gathering point for all the dark creatures that had been scattered by his previous defeat. Worse still, his agents were abroad in the world, seeking the One Ring with desperate urgency. It was then that the true purpose of their alliance became clear. They could not prevent the coming war. The forces already in motion were too great, the corruption too deeply rooted, but they could prepare for it, could position themselves and their allies to meet the darkness when it finally broke upon the world in full fury. Their role would not be to stand in the front lines of battle, but to preserve the light that would guide others through the struggle. The irony was not lost on either of them. Galadriel, who had refused the pardon of the Valar to remain in Middle-earth as guardian, would see her realm's protection depend ultimately on the destruction of the very rings that made her guardianship possible. Gandalf, sent from Valinor to guide and counsel, would be called upon to sacrifice everything, even his physical form, to kindle the hope that would carry others to victory. Yet in their sacrifice lay the seeds of triumph. The alliance they had forged in secret, the trust they had built through shared burden and common purpose, would become the foundation upon which the Fellowship of the Ring was built. When the hour of greatest darkness came, when Saruman's treachery was revealed, and the full scope of Sauron's return became clear, it would be their partnership that provided the wisdom and strength needed to guide a small hobbit toward the fires of Mount Doom. The War of the Ring was coming, with all its terror and loss, its moments of despair and flashes of impossible hope. But thanks to a secret meeting in the Golden Wood, the forces of light would not face it unprepared. As our tale draws toward its close, we must lift our eyes from the immediate concerns of Middle-earth and gaze across the vast waters that separate the mortal world from the undying lands. For the meeting between Gandalf and Galadriel was not merely a moment of political alliance or strategic planning, but an echo of harmonies that had been sung since the beginning of time itself. In the halls of Valinor, where the light of the two trees had once illuminated gardens of impossible beauty, the Valar themselves had watched the unfolding drama of Middle-earth with eyes that saw across the circles of the world. Manwë, greatest of the Valar, felt every wind that blew across the mortal lands. Varda, who had kindled the stars, looked down upon the darkness spreading from Dol Guldur with sorrow that touched the very foundations of heaven. And Ulmo, whose power ran in all the waters of the world, heard in the deepest currents the echo of choices yet unmade. The irony of the situation was not lost upon the powers of the West. Two of their children, one who had refused to return, one who had been sent away on a sacred mission, now bore the responsibility for preserving what remained of the light in Middle-earth. Galadriel's long exile had transformed her from a proud princess of the Noldor into something greater, a guardian whose very presence was a bulwark against despair. Gandalf's humble service had revealed the true nature of power, not dominion over others, but the strength to inspire them to achieve what they never dreamed possible. In the music that underlies all creation, their alliance struck a chord that resonated with the original themes of the Ainulindalë. Here was harmony arising from discord, light kindled in darkness, hope planted in the soil of seeming defeat. The meeting in Lothlorien was more than a strategic conference. It was a moment when the music of creation itself found new expression through the choices of free beings. For both Gandalf and Galadriel carried within themselves the memory of that first great song, when all the Ainur raised their voices together to bring forth the vision of the world. They remembered the themes that Ilúvatar had woven through the music, the way that even Melkor's discord had been transformed into something greater and more beautiful than any single voice could achieve alone. Their partnership was an echo of that cosmic harmony, a small part of the vast symphony that would ultimately resolve all conflicts into a final, perfect chord. The tragedy and triumph of their alliance lay in its very nature. Both knew that their time in Middle-earth was drawing toward its end. The age of the elves was passing, and with it would go the last remnants of the elder days when the world was young and wonders walked openly beneath the stars. Galadriel's realm would fade when the ring she bore was destroyed, and she would finally take ship for Valinor after ages of self-imposed exile. Gandalf would complete his mission and return to the west, his work in Middle-earth finished at last. Yet in their ending lay the seeds of something new. The Fourth Age would belong to men, those children of Ilúvatar whose fate lay beyond the circles of the world. The small people, hobbits especially, would inherit a world cleansed of ancient evils but filled with new possibilities. The light that Gandalf and Galadriel had preserved through their alliance would shine not from elven realms or secret councils, but from simple homes where ordinary folk chose each day to tend their gardens and love their neighbors. In the final analysis, their secret meeting had been about more than strategy or alliance. It had been about trust, the kind of trust that allows one being to share their deepest fears and highest hopes with another. It had been about sacrifice, the willingness to give up personal desires for the greater good. Most of all, it had been about hope, the faith that even in the darkest hours, light endures and love finds a way. As the ship sailed from the Grey Havens in the years that followed, carrying the last of the ring-bearers into the west, the memory of their meeting remained, not in any written record or formal history, but in the very trees of Lothlorien, in the singing of the waves against the western shores, in the hearts of those who remembered that once, when darkness threatened to overwhelm the world, two voices had been raised in harmony against the night. The secret meeting between Gandalf and Galadriel had ended, but its echoes would resonate through all the ages yet to come, a reminder that in the darkest hour, hope endures and love finds a way to kindle light in the furthest corners of the world. In the quiet of the Golden Wood, the very foundations of the world had turned, unseen by most, unrecorded by history, but never forgotten by those who understand that the greatest victories are often won not with swords and armies, but with trust, sacrifice, and the quiet courage to hope when all seems lost. Subscribe so the next tale finds you.